again. But it's the only way you're ever gonna learn. You look back and it's all in the past. I'm dwelling on the thoughts I cannot say to you. If I don't say the words, then maybe it's not true. And it feels alright.
Good evening, welcome to NUFC Manners with me, Steve Wraith. Good evening, Ben Jacobs. How are you?
Good evening. Very well indeed. How are you?
Very good, mate. Very good. And as always, we've got an hour to cram in as many questions as possible from eager Newcastle fans wanting to know if there are any more incomings or outgoings in this transfer window. And we're going to start with the Twitter questions. We'll go through them for the first half hour. And Leicester features in one or two of these. Geordie Tune for Life came in with a question for yourself. He said, lots of rumours that Leicester are in trouble financially and need to sell players before they can buy. What is their situation regarding player sales? Is this true? And how dangerous is it for the club? Thank you in advance. And what we'll do is we'll connect that one with with the question, I guess, about Harvey Barnes, who has been linked with Newcastle, and a lot of people asking about that tonight. £50 million is what the papers are reporting. So is that the player that Newcastle might try and get from Leicester if there is going to be a bit of a fire sale? Give us your views on that.
Well, I think from Leicester's point of view, they have to keep within financial fair play, and the fact too that the football club was probably hit harder than most by the COVID-19 pandemic, and you find that of clubs of Leicester's size and location that they're heavily reliant on everything from TV money to ticket sales, more so than other clubs. So I do think they're looking at outgoings first before they can bring in anybody of significance, financially speaking, of course. But the beauty of Leicester's recruitment is that they haven't always needed to go and spend a ton of money. They've been able to find some diamonds in the rough. And N'Golo Kante, Riyad Mahrez are just two examples of that. So I don't think that Leicester would see, for example, the sale of Harvey Barnes as being the catalyst for them to do their business. I think just generally, and unfortunately, they're struggling in the market. And with Barnes, the take, in my opinion, is not for sale. And the Newcastle interest may be genuine, and he'd certainly be a fantastic signing and a good fit in Eddie Howe's system. But fundamentally, Leicester want to keep on to their core stars. So they're prepared to let Tielemans go because the contract is running down. And then with players like Maddison, there may be some interest, especially as the window comes to a close. I know that Tottenham have been monitoring him for quite some time. And he's another player that if he wants to make a step up, particularly, for example, in Spurs' case, if he had Champions League football, there may be a possibility there as well. So I still think Leicester want to keep on to him, but it's not unthinkable that he goes. But with Barnes and Fofana, what you're seeing is Leicester double the market value price tag. And that essentially tells you not for sale. And it reminds me of Jack Harrison, another player that Newcastle have looked at, that of course the interest is genuine, but as soon as you start talking either through intermediaries or directly about the possible sale price, you realize how unfeasible it is. And there's absolutely no question in my mind that Leicester will not sell Harvey Barnes for, let's say, under 40 million, and they will probably ask for 50 million. And Newcastle United's starting valuation for Harvey Barnes is somewhere closer to 25 million. And we've seen all window that they don't just throw money around for the sake of it. So at the moment, I think the clubs are miles apart in valuation. There's been no official bid placed, and Leicester are sending out vibes that Harvey Barnes is not for sale. And I hope as a fan that is the case, if I take off my journalist hat for just a moment, because Leicester's impetus has to be framed around these key stars, and Barnes is one of them. And I think, as I said before, that Tielemans will in all likelihood go. Maddison might be the one that Leicester have to kind of force out of the club due to maybe the player's desire if a strong offer comes. And I say Leicester force rather than Maddison force, because that might be where there, as you alluded to in your question, is the financial incentivization on Leicester's part to kind of balance the books and make sure that they're comfortably within financial fair play and the Premier League's profit and sustainability rules. But Barnes, I genuinely think from Leicester's perspective, is not for sale, and Newcastle would really have to table an offer that is miles above market value to try and change their opinion.
It's an interesting one. We get linked with quite a lot of players over the course of this transfer window. It's what we predicted, of course, would happen. Nathan on Twitter says, "Does Ben think Newcastle could be playing a waiting game with regards to players such as Dominic Calvert-Lewin? With regards to Everton's financial situation?"
Yeah, I mean, Everton are in big trouble, even though they claim to be within the Premier League's profit and sustainability rules. Their COVID losses, which they've offset, are much higher than any other club. And still the other 19 Premier League clubs are wondering why and whether there's any explanation behind that. But as yet, they haven't been punished. And I think that even though Everton are looking at incomings, they're relatively bargain in terms of either their price or the wage structure. So they'd love, for example, a loan for Levi Colwill from Chelsea. They've been offered Ross Barkley back as well, which would be a very interesting signing. But they probably do still need to have another outgoing. And the key question is really what the Richarlison fee has done to that football club for their books. And they haven't declared that yet. So we won't know until those figures come out. And obviously, they've also got some commercial opportunities for the new season and post-COVID, all of their season ticket sales and stuff. So Everton might feel that their finances now are a little bit more stable. But I think from Dominic Calvert-Lewin's perspective, he's open to a move. And Everton, if they get the right offer, might have to consider that strictly in financial terms, even though Frank Lampard probably doesn't want to see him go. I don't think there's anything yet, though, in specifically Newcastle and Dominic Calvert-Lewin. I know that when the Ekitike deal was ongoing, he was kind of a backup option, but since then the football club haven't done too much with it. And I don't think it's a waiting game from Eddie Howe's perspective necessarily. I think it's more down to the fact that when you get to a certain point 2 weeks or so before the season and into your pre-season, managers like to see what they've got. And then at that point, they can look at the chemistry and make final decisions on players. So you get a surge at the beginning of the window because you've had long-standing deals and targets that you've planned a window or two ahead, and it opens. And if you can swoop early, then that's what you do. And then you kind of take a breath and start looking at the squad and working out whether it's decision A or decision B, or whether you're happy with what you've got. And then from there, that's when you have a second swoop. And the second swoop can come now, but also after a game or two of the season as we get a little bit closer. So I don't think that Newcastle are necessarily waiting. I think they're just being prudent and sensible. They're making sure that they don't just buy for the sake of buying. And yet fundamentally, there is still that urgency to find another striker. And it's really interesting, the contrast in the strategy at the moment, because Dan Ashworth has come in and predominantly Newcastle have looked at young attacking players that might not be the finished product, which suggests that they are going to gamble on the fitness and form, or not necessarily form, but certainly fitness of Callum Wilson to be the main source of goals once again. And Chris Wood is still there, bit of a forgotten figure almost with the 25 million price tag, but still also has that ability to chip in. And fans this season might be surprised at how integral he ends up being, either from the bench or just as a player that can get you that 6 or 7 goals that might make the difference between 12th or 10th and 6th in the table. So don't underestimate him, even though most think he's kind of a short-term signing bought above market value to fend off relegation. And because his impact was not as, I suppose, integral as Kieran Trippier when he was fit, or Bruno, people have sort of discounted him and they don't like the fact that he's at the football club. Maybe that's a little bit strong. I'd love to hear in the chat what Newcastle fans that have watched him since he's joined think, but everyone wants to get excited. And Dan Ashworth seemingly is going down that younger route. So we've seen Ekitike, Callum Wendo might be another option as well, although Christophe Gaultier likes him a lot at PSG. And then at the opposite extreme, there's 1 or 2 finished Premier League products like Dominic Calvert-Lewin, a return for somebody like Ivan Toney and so on that have also been discussed. And obviously the first thing Newcastle need to do is determine whether or not they're looking for a red hot talent that is long term, or whether they want a finished Premier League product that is short term. And obviously if they go down the latter route, then where does that leave somebody like Chris Wood, who already falls into that category?
Yeah, I mean, it's everybody is talking about that situation. Newcastle, of course, played Burnley behind closed doors in Portugal yesterday. Rather strange way of doing it, but both teams seem to be happy with it. Although I can imagine Vincent Kompany probably wasn't as happy with the way that the results panned out. But it was agreed before that the Newcastle and Burnley 11 would play 2 games of football on alternate pitches. So they played the first 45 minutes of the first game, swapped pitches with the team from that 11 into the other game, whilst the 2 Burnley 11s apparently stayed the same throughout. But Newcastle reported the games as training sessions. So it was like 4 separate 45-minute practice matches that they played yesterday. Newcastle won 4-1 in one of the halves. Willock got 2, Anderson and Almiron. In another one of the halves, Newcastle won 2-1 with Wilson and Almiron scoring. On the other pitch, Newcastle won 1-0, St Maximin, and then the second half 2-0 with Ritchie and Murphy scoring. This way of doing it meant, obviously, people got 90 minutes and 24 players were used. Notable exceptions on the day were Turner Cook and A. Murphy. Watts, Fernandez, Shaw, Wood, Lewis and Dubravka didn't get a run out. But interesting way of doing it, Ben. And again, just, another useful way of, Eddie Howe and his coaching staff casting his eye over the over the players who've been there before they came to the club, but also the new signings.
Yeah, and I think when you're into pre-season, you can push for privacy, and in addition to that, when you bill it as a training exercise or session, there becomes less pressure. If you look at these mini tournaments taking place in America, and I've been across and covering some of them with CBS, when you get results like Manchester United thrashing Liverpool or Arsenal beating Chelsea by 4-0, there becomes more scrutiny, and people treat the matches as reality ahead of the new season, and the score becomes more relevant. And then if you do well, there's a buzz, and then if you do badly, there's somehow a panic and a meltdown, particularly across social media. And we've definitely seen that after the Chelsea lost to Arsenal. So when you do it this way, it's more relaxed. It takes pressure off the players. You can try new things. You can also do things that you might potentially want to unleash on game 1 of the season without them being seen. And it's actually quite archaic when you think about it, to treat pre-season where you've got that flexibility to try new things and formats and play the game in a different way, to just always do 90. So Leicester had a game against Leuven, for example, where they pre-agreed that they were going to play 2 halves of 45 and then 30 minutes of so-called extra time. And other football clubs like the idea of always doing penalties when they're behind closed doors, regardless of the score, because it gives the players that kind of practice and slightly more of a pressurized environment. So I think game management is underrated, and player rotation is the key in pre-season anyway. And if you kind of drag on an 11 for 45 and then replace them for the next 45 and play it under the public eye, not only do you get more judged and maybe give things away close to the season, but there becomes this sort of tiresome aspect. And what I like how preseason has changed is it has become 45 and 45 for a lot of clubs, whereas it always used to be a starting 11 and then after about 60 minutes, just rolling subs every 5 minutes. And that was really frustrating because it kills the rhythm and the momentum. So why not have 4 different quarters? Why not play 2 games as my club Leicester did? I think we were at Preston and Derby on the same day and won both games, because then you get that ability to use more players, try new things. So I don't think there's anything wrong with how Newcastle are approaching things. And pre-season is always an anomaly because teams lose all their games and then go on a winning streak to start the season. Other teams win all their preseason games and then have a horrific start to the season. So you never quite know who's sharp and who's ready for the season until it gets underway. But I think the privacy definitely alleviates a little bit of the pressure from the players. And of course, the big clubs don't tend to play at home anyway, except sometimes 1 game to end their preseason. So then when you're away in all these different places and you're on paper the bigger club, you have that ability to say, well, we'll come, but we don't want to take ticket sales from this, or we want it to be a training exercise. And Newcastle have been quite smart because, to be perfectly honest with you, in pre-season and in the window, they've crept under the radar. And I think that's going to benefit them come the start of the season.
Steve Matthewson and Ice Cube both asking if the reports that Callum Hudson-Odoi is a target for Newcastle. Is it true? And if it is, how serious of a target is he priority-wise?
Hudson-Odoi, by the way, would be a great signing for a club like Newcastle United. At the moment, I think Chelsea are just assessing his future, and Newcastle haven't made any kind of formal move at all. The interest, I think, is real there on Newcastle's part, though. And the thing with Hudson-Odoi is just that he's only back to full fitness. So it's going to take quite a lot to persuade Chelsea to sell him to anybody, because they haven't had the opportunity to assess him. Let's not forget that he didn't feature in the Premier League after pretty impressive displays, particularly one I remember, which was a win over Spurs back in January. And then he got injured, and now he's on that kind of rehabilitation path. And I think that he's on record as saying that he's back to full fitness, and Chelsea are very glad to see him back. So he may well be on Newcastle's list, but I think that from Chelsea's point of view, they still see him as part of their plans when fully fit. And the other factor in all of this is just the versatility, because Hudson-Odoi wants to work on the movement to the right-hand side of the field. And I think he thinks that in doing that, because Sterling is a left-sided forward, there can be a relationship and a balance and a partnership. And my sense at the Chelsea end, therefore, is it's going to still take something to prize him away at this stage, and that Chelsea will still let him get back to full fitness before making any kind of final decisions on his future. So it remains to be seen, really, whether there's too much substance to these links. I think that you always find when a club like Newcastle in reports have turned their attention, there's sometimes a bit of a question mark as to what the substance is. So I think that with Hudson-Odoi, the feeling was originally that actually the player that Newcastle probably would have liked originally was Anthony Gordon from Everton, and there was never a realistic chance of making that transfer happen. And then suddenly it becomes, well, maybe they're going to go instead to Hudson-Odoi. And then you start thinking, well, where's that come from? Because Hudson-Odoi is a England winger. He's only 21. He falls into a lot of categories that Newcastle would be looking for. So you sort of feel like that is a little bit maybe of agent talk that's bumped that name up in the prioritization, because Newcastle were originally thinking that Gordon could be possible. And then when they made the inquiry, they found out that it wasn't. So I think it's one to watch over the window, only because there might be a feeling that Chelsea would listen to offers. But again, to reiterate, the challenge with Hudson-Odoi is just the fact that Chelsea only feel he's going to get better, and he's back to full fitness and very well liked when he was fit and playing regularly in the Premier League. So that won't be an easy transfer, and we'll have to watch it over the window and see whether that's the move that Newcastle choose to make. But at the moment, there's nothing between the two clubs.
Yeah, Stephen asks on Twitter as well, what's the asking price for Sarr at Watford? Not sure he had a good season last time out, but looked great the last time they were relegated with Liverpool. Looking at him as a credible target, he'd be an upgrade on Murphy. What's your thoughts on this?
I like Sarr a lot, and I know that there is a lot of interest in him for sure. The question is going to be over the price. Back in May, there was a feeling that it would be around 40 million, which is extremely high, and that would be intended to ward off suitors. I think that most people would value him more around the 25 million, maybe with a few add-ons on top, but anything over 30 million, a bit like Jack Harrison, and I would expect Newcastle United to be put off. I'm surprised, by the way, given that we're talking about the possibility of making a signing from Watford, that Newcastle never came in for Emmanuel Dennis. And I know that Nottingham Forest and even West Ham have been looking at him over the coming days, but there's a few cheaper options than somebody like Sarr, and Dennis is probably going to be one of them. And I think that at 24 years of age, and given the 10 goals that he scored last season in just 35 games, I believe, that would make a lot of sense. And that is, of course, why there is Premier League interest. I don't think that Newcastle have made any kind of move. I think earlier in the window, he was a name being touted or offered around because he wants the exit from Watford. So that's one to watch just generally across the window. And if I was Eddie Howe, I would actually be going for Dennis over Sarr. And then the other kind of wide player that may be available in the market that we have spoken about before is Maxwell Cornet, and Everton are looking at him, Forest are looking at him, but Newcastle have been in that conversation as well. And he's kind of like the bargain fee of all the wide players that, or creative ones that we've spoken about.
Does he have a release clause, Malcolm Gordon's asking?
Yeah, there's stories about the release clause, but I'm not sure that it has kind of come into force. Some of the release clauses, delayed release clauses, and can only be activated at a later date. I'm not aware of a release clause amount, I've got to be honest, and certainly not one that could be activated in this window. But I don't think it would be necessary even if there was one, because I believe that Cornet is being offered around the 12 to 15 million mark, which would be a bargain price, in my opinion, for a player of his quality. But Newcastle would simply have to assess whether he adds anything comparative to what they've already got. And when you look at the other clubs circling, like Nottingham Forest and West Ham, there's clearly that Premier League interest. And from mixed clubs, a newly promoted team all the way through to a European contender, which shows you the kind of demand. But Newcastle, as I understand it, earlier in the window were offered Cornet for certainly under 15 million, and they haven't moved on it. So I don't think there's too much in that at this point from a Newcastle perspective. But it's one to watch again, because if they don't get another wide target, or another club makes a bid, it still could trigger Newcastle into action, because for once we're talking about a player that isn't being overpriced and that isn't above market value and could offer quite a lot. So Newcastle's challenge has always been, they found their players. There's no denying it. If Howe was ever to come out, not that a manager would, but openly say, this was our 1, this was our 2, this was our 3. And Newcastle have found those targets. They've allocated them. They're not in the dark as to who they've wanted, but they've just not been able to agree the right fee or the deal with agents. But in the case of Cornet and Emmanuel Dennis, I genuinely think as well, they are at bargain fees. It's the same for Yuri Tielemans as well, due to the contract situation. And yet we haven't seen Newcastle move. And I think that tells you everything, that Howe's happy with what he's got at large. And he's not just going to buy for the sake of it, even if other clubs seem more busy, even if fans want more movement, because signings are always excited. There's a restraint almost from Howe and Ashworth to make sure that if they do go into the market, it's going to be sensible or not at all.
Yeah, I would agree with you there, mate. It's definitely feels like a waiting game. I think with Newcastle, I think that they will act towards the end of the transfer window. Dark by design, ASM, keep or sell Chelsea and Spurs links. Discuss that one, Ben. I mean, are those links with Chelsea and Spurs serious? And as a somebody who has an interest in Newcastle, although it's your second team, would you keep or sell ASM?
I think that Newcastle would like to keep ASM for sure. And if they don't, then they suddenly have to look at 2 creative players, potentially, assuming that they want 1 now and ASM's already part of the plans. So that's the challenge. And we're 2 weeks before the season. It's going to be interesting, because for me, it will all come down to the desire of ASM, because I've heard rumblings, no more than that, but some talk that Newcastle are intent on locking him down in a new deal and as soon as possible. And that wards off the suitors, but also protects a future resale value. And sometimes the player that's settled now does get convinced to do exactly that, sign another year extension or 2. And if next summer a viable offer comes in, the club give you a kind of gentleman's agreement that they'll let you leave, and then they've protected the sell-on fee rather than letting the contract run down any further. So Newcastle would like to tie him down, but it's all about ASM. And I do think that he might be peaked if an offer comes in. Tottenham have certainly made a historical inquiry, but they've now had a very busy window, so it remains to be seen whether they move. And ASM hasn't been part of Chelsea's initial shortlist, but they're missing out on 1 or 2 targets, particularly in the attacking sense. They made a late bid for Gabriel Jesus. It was quite hopeful. I don't think they ever thought they were going to get him, but they tried. Raheem Sterling's come in, but they want one more. And the thing about Chelsea to watch as the window goes on, not just with ASM, but attackers generally, is that if Ziyech gets his move to Milan, if Werner goes out the door, and there's a bit of friction at the moment between Werner and Thomas Tuchel, and if Chelsea already wanted another attacker, that might mean that they want two creative players, whether you call them false nines, number 10s, wingers, or out and out forwards. And that's where later in the window, they could be opportunistic and come in for somebody like ASM. So there's not too much substance at the moment, but I think the most interesting thing is, what does ASM want? And how will he react now comparative to if an offer comes in? Will he be piqued, or is he fully committed to Newcastle? And if Newcastle behind closed doors think the latter, they'll tie him down to a new contract as soon as they can, and they'll end all of this speculation. But as long as it's in limbo and there's still, a month and a bit left of the window, there's still a chance later in the window that these clubs being linked with ASM will come in with a late offer. And I think, again, Newcastle are wary of that. And that's exactly why they want to make sure they get in their own attack-minded target or targets, say striker plus winger or creative player, to make sure that if a bid that they can't refuse was to come in, even if it's a bit of a shock, they're well covered. So at the moment, Newcastle fans can rest easy with ASM because Chelsea are definitely not actively moving. And I don't think that Spurs have followed up on their interest to the point where they're considering any direct communication with Newcastle at this point. But there's a long period of time still left in the window. And when a club is interested, that smoke doesn't come without fire. And they have multiple targets, and ASM might be one that they've just decided to move away from. But easily you could see a scenario where somebody at least tries to bid for him, and then Newcastle and ASM would have a decision to be made.
Okay, a big thank you to our sponsor, Spider Miner, worldwide coverage from Gareth, Nathan and the lads, the only cryptocurrency miner that can mine 5 different cryptocurrencies at the same time whilst using virtually no energy, and it's VPN protected. Buy yours now at www.miner.spidervpn.org. Thanks to Skips and Bins, telephone 0800 25 45 25 3, email inquiries at skipsandbins.com, website www.skipsandbins.com. Easy contract free and pay-as-you-go waste collection. Thanks to L&G Family Funeral Directors, 01913897245, and a Garden of Healing Dispensary, CBD, hemp and cannabinoid specialists, www.gohd.com. Thanks to the lads at Away Day Clothing, and thanks to qtechshop.co.uk, the makers of pool tables and snooker tables in Wallsend, Newcastle, and the guys who run our website, NUFCmatters.com. Thanks to Mr. Vicky's, handmade sauces in Cumbria. You can find them at mrvickies.co.uk or 01768 210 102. Thanks to Neil and the lads down at Media Arts for all the help with the video side of things. And if you want to subscribe, then you hit the NUFC Matters logo in the bottom right-hand corner and you can subscribe for free. Hit the thumb up to like the video, click share to your social media, and drop into the comments box to speak to like-minded Newcastle fans or to pose a question for Ben. We're also available as a podcast on iTunes, Spotify, and other podcast providers. If you want to join the channel and help us, then click join underneath the video, or you can go to nufcmatters.com website and click for membership, or put your phone over the top of the QR code. It will take you straight there. And if you pay a one-off fee, you can get a cup, a pen, a scarf, a membership card, and entry into the monthly draw. Don't forget, if you're a subscriber, we do send you a car sticker for free, but you've got to email john@nufcmatters.com to claim it. We do support the food bank on the channel. nufcfansfoodbank.co.uk is the matchday bucket. It's virtual, and you can make a donation there 365 days of the year. And don't forget, the Alan Shearer ball, signed ball, is still up for grabs. You simply go to nufcmatters.com and buy a raffle ticket for $2.99. You have to be in it to win it. And don't forget the NUFC Matters Super 6 score predictor. Another 18 people registered at the weekend. We're going to have a very good time with this, I think. Join the Matters gang. Enter into our own Super League. It's £10 per entry for the season. Cash prize winner every month. Exclusive Manager of the Month t-shirt. A cash prize for the overall season winner. And a trophy and a Manager of the Year t-shirt. Sign up now at nufcmatters.com. PeterBeardsleySoccerSchool.com is where you can find out the information for the August summer camps. Monday night training as well. It's going very, very well, and the feedback on that has been absolutely superb. And why wouldn't it be with somebody as legendary as Peter Beardsley being involved? Also got this little video to show. And that's our very own John from QTech. And that's just a few pictures from yesterday, which is fantastic. It's a big thank you from WBFC Juniors to us. We sponsored all the players' medals and team trophies at the Under-11 tournament on Saturday for WBFC Juniors at the Fox Hunters Pavilion and Pitches. And the email that we've received says it was a great day for all players, parents, and all attending, and they just want to thank us for putting big smiles on the kids' faces. So thanks very much for your feedback. Thanks for John for popping down, and fantastic for John sorting that out. Absolutely brilliant. Great to see the kids doing well, and only too happy to help something in the local community. Okay, back to the questions. And Christopher Greenup says, do you think Che Adams could be a target? Steve Hasty and Neil Mitchell were going on about this at the weekend, Ben.
Che Adams is a tricky one, I think, purely because Southampton have already lost Armando Broja and aren't coming back in for him as far as trying to either get a loan or a permanent deal. Nottingham Forest made some inquiries about him as well. Forest are actually quite busy at the moment in the market. They've obviously managed to sign Jesse Lingard and beat West Ham to that signing. And the feeling was a reluctance as far as selling Che Adams. So that's the main problem, I suppose, at the moment. But one thing to look out for is that Ralph Hasenhüttl has kind of been saying quite fervently and at times in a frustrated manner that he wants more strikers. And if he's able to bring some in during the course of the window, then you might see Che Adams be surplus to requirements. I'm not so sure that it would be a particularly smart signing, if I'm honest, because he doesn't have a particularly prolific goal-scoring record. James Ward-Prowse, I think, got more last season from behind. He also hasn't scored in pre-season either, and the price still that Southampton would be looking for would be somewhere between 15 and 20 million. So when you consider, even though they're completely different types of players, that Chris Wood's already at the club and that Newcastle are looking for these kind of 18 to 21-year-old young strikers, often from reputed foreign academies, Che Adams for me just seems a slightly left field fit. It actually feels like a little bit of a panic buy. He's 26 years of age, I believe. He is not necessarily happy or firing at Southampton. And I don't think in any of his Southampton seasons, he's ever got into double figures across the season. So you'd have to ask the question, what does he add, especially between 15 and 20 million? I've not been across that particular transfer, so I can't speak to Newcastle's specific interest, but I can tell you from the Southampton perspective that even though they're probably long-term open to a sale, until they bring in another striker, they're not going to let him go.
Okay, and next question that we have is from Chris Dodds. He says, hi, Ben, I did inbox you on Twitter this question. Did you see any problems with PSG dealing with Newcastle with the state interests and the historical problems? Not so much for Neymar, but in time.
I don't think so. Ultimately, when fans perceive clubs to be rivals for whatever reason on the field or due to ownership off it, the usual reality is that negotiations tend to be very amicable. And the best example of that is probably Barcelona and Chelsea, where if you log on to Twitter, you think that they hate each other. And if you hear Thomas Tuchel, there's definitely a frustration. But the reality is that they could still do business over Paqueta. They could still potentially do business over De Jong as well. And the presidents and owners / sporting director in Chelsea's case, in Todd Boehly, are having dinner together. And it's exactly the same with all of these big clubs, that there's always an appreciation that you don't burn a bridge. You don't rule out doing business with really anybody, because executives try and keep their enemies close, if you like. And I'm not saying that Newcastle and PSG are enemies per se, but they won't be averse to doing any business together, because if it's in the interest of the player, if it's in the interest of the finances, then why not just proceed? And it's different leagues as well, which is the most important thing in reality. There's not going to be a deal that just doesn't take place because Qatar and Saudi Arabia historically have been at odds, or because Nasser Al-Khalifi doesn't want to see Newcastle United succeed. And if PSG think they've got a player that's going to succeed, they won't sell them to anybody. And they've proven that. And we might well even see that with Callum Wendo, who everybody thought might be available and Leeds were chasing and Newcastle have inquired in the past, but PSG could just hold on to him as well. So I don't think there's going to be any scenario where PSG and Newcastle don't do business. I think it's just about the reality of, at this stage, who might be available at PSG that Newcastle might consider. And probably the name that everyone's going for is Gini Wijnaldum, because there's that affection there. And he's the one name that is surplus to requirements for sure. PSG will sell him or loan him even. So there might be a window of opportunity for Newcastle there. And there's lots of excitement, and that would be popular. And I think that he would be open to a Premier League return. There's nothing, by the way, in the notion that Liverpool also are looking for a return for the player too. They've entirely distanced themselves and any links with the player as fake news. So from a Premier League perspective, if Newcastle chose to move, they might have a clear run at that. But one thing I can say is just that if, and it is an if, Newcastle chose to do business with PSG on that deal or any other, the politics between the countries wouldn't stop any business, in my opinion.
Okay, that's good to hear. This question we have from Mad Mark is one which again is on everyone's lips. He says, question for Ben, do Newcastle now have a clear run at Lucas Paqueta this summer, as Arsenal seem to have ruled out a move following a meeting with Paqueta's agent and Arsenal executives last week? He goes on to say, Arsenal director Edu said, I really like Paqueta, I'm a big fan of him, but as of today, the reality is that there's not even a conversation to sign him, as we have many players in that position. What's your thoughts on that, Ben?
Well, it's no clear run for Newcastle because there's lots of interest. And as I've previously reported, Arsenal were one of those clubs who were interested, but they never took it any further. And I think that Edu's comments kind of reflect that. What Arsenal did was they went to Paqueta's representatives to establish the lay of the land and the price, and then they've not had any movement since. It's perfectly normal for a sporting director to distance themselves from a player when, as Edu says, they've got lots of competition in that position. But let's not forget that Arsenal are focusing as much on outgoings as incomings. So a lot may change, and the same for Tielemans in terms of where they've got space to bolster their squad at the end of the window compared to now. And it wouldn't remotely surprise me if Paqueta drags on right until the end of the window. But regardless of Arsenal, it's not a clear run for Newcastle. Firstly, because they've also, like Arsenal, only expressed an interest and not taken it any further at this point, and have also again gone to Paqueta's agent to try and find out the lay of the land before going to Lyon. And then at Lyon's end, Jean-Michel Aulas speaks of lots of suitors and offers and interest. So there's going to be competition for a player of Paqueta's quality come what may, whether it's from the Premier League or across Europe or beyond. But it's a complicated situation. I think I explained some of this last time as well. Paqueta's price will, first of all, be around 65 million euros all in, and that's still cheaper than the 80-odd million euros that Newcastle were told when they inquired about the player in January. So any notion of a cut price deal for around 35 million is incorrect, as I understand it. And the volume of interest will mean that if Lyon sell, they get a great deal. Paqueta wants a fresh challenge. So that's the positive. So there is a window of opportunity for any suitor if they choose to act. The challenge is going to be about agreeing a deal with Lyon. And what complicates that challenge even more is that Jean-Michel Aulas may be saying that he's willing to sell, but John Textor is the American incoming majority owner at Lyon, who doesn't yet have a say, but will soon. And he's the one that has stated on record that Lyon are going to compete with PSG, which is a massive claim. So I don't think Textor wants Paqueta to go. I think Olas is stuck in the middle and might be scapegoated for a sale if the player tries to force himself out. But there's also a possibility that Olas just says all of this to spark interest and pacify the players' camp. And then as Textor comes into the football club, when that finally happens, he just puts his foot down and says not for sale because the player's still contracted. So there's politics within Lyon. There's a challenge with the price, and there's a large amount of suitors circling. So it's definitely not a clear run for Newcastle United. And again, to reiterate, even though there's a lot of excitement and there is a long-standing interest from Newcastle dating back to January, they, like Arsenal, haven't actually translated that interest into anything advanced to date. So we're going to have to watch it. The reality is that when one club bids for Paqueta, I think a lot of other clubs will move. So it's not unthinkable that Newcastle could enter the race. But at the time of recording, all they have done is expressed an interest.
Exactly. Yeah, lots of press stories based on people just expressing an interest, I've got to say, and you've just got to take it with a pinch of salt at times. Michael Barlow says, any idea why Belotti hasn't found another club yet?
No real knowledge specifically on why he's not found another club yet. I know that West Ham and Everton and some would say Newcastle, although I'm not so sure, were sort of actively offered the player, so to speak, and it's a relatively low-risk signing. So I think that he'll find a club. Let's not forget that he's only 28 years of age, and as a consequence could be a really valuable signing. And he's won over 40 caps for Italy, and he's played over, I think, probably 250 times for Torino as well. So I think that somebody is going to take a gamble on him for sure. I know that Sevilla are a club that are circling. I know that Borussia Dortmund have made some inquiries as well. And with Sevilla, what will be interesting is if they finally offload Jules Koundé, which is likely, whether it's Chelsea or Barcelona, they'll have a record sale. And then at that point, they will be able to spend some of that money. And look out for Dortmund as well, because unfortunately, due to Sebastian Aller's health situation, they may need to bolster their attacking option as well. So that one could develop over time. And West Ham had looked at him too. The challenge, obviously, with West Ham is that Skamaka is basically a done deal, pending a few formalities and a medical. But West Ham were saying only 48 hours ago, when I was talking to sources, that it was Skamaka and Broja in an ideal world. So then if they've got Skamaka, but Broja's more problematic because Chelsea are reluctant sellers, they could still come in for another attacker as well. So I think that he's not going to struggle to find a club. It maybe is more akin to that kind of Christian Eriksen scenario where the player himself is just biding his time. Some players want to be in for game one of the season. Others are prepared to wait and rush it a little bit more a few days before the season starts, or even towards the end of the window, because they just want to weigh up what's right for them and their family, and they're expecting offers to come in. And I think that might be the case with Belotti. I will be surprised if in the next week or two his situation isn't clearer and more offers don't emerge. But there's Premier League interest. Dortmund is one to watch, and Sevilla is another club to keep an eye out on.
Ben, what's your thoughts on Darren Eales' appointment? Chief executive come in. We've also brought John Devine in, who's a Newcastle fan. A legal eagle, I guess, who's been appointed now. Which again, he's another good man to bring in. It's the pieces of the jigsaw behind the scenes are just as important as those in the team.
Yeah, very sensible signing. Darren Eales, highly respected from his time at Spurs and also in MLS as well. And I think that he very much sees Newcastle United as the right fit and a sleeping giant, and wants to be part of the project from the ground up. And the things that I liked about what Eales did at Atlanta United was the fan engagement, which is a key part of what this ownership group are saying, at least the Rubin and Staveley part, about being open and transparent. PIF, as I've said many times, might talk the talk, but we've yet to see them walk the walk and really directly engage with fans or media. But Eales will be the opposite. I think he'll be a very open, very transparent, very amicable type of executive who will look to do a couple of main things. One will be to improve the fan engagement, and that's both the relationship, which is growing anyway under the new ownership group, between players and fans and executives and fan base. So more collaboration and consultation, but then also specifically fan engagement on a match day. And how can you modernize that? How can you make it more digital led? How can you open up more commercial opportunities? How can you improve the food on a match day and the overall experience to basically make sure that away from the football side of things, fans get value for money? And American sport and franchises and MLS are very, very good at that. There's far more of a culture where the football club gives you official watch parties. They help you with your away day travel. They make buying merchandise more affordable. They've got reward-based systems. So the more you spend, the cheaper you get. If you buy a home and away kit at some MLS clubs one season, you get a free voucher for one or the other the following season. So effectively, if you're constantly getting your family a ton of kits, then you're saving money as you go along. And I think that is all part of the thinking of how can someone like Eales take what he learned at Atlanta on fan engagement and translate it into the Premier League and really have Newcastle United over time lead in that area. And then, of course, he'll have to try and boost the club's commercial income. He'll work closely with PIF. And it'll be really interesting to see whether beyond just the need to have Middle East representation and commercial deals and grow the brand in the MENA region, whether Eales actually takes a lead more in finding commercial income from elsewhere. So working parallel in conjunction with PIF, but not necessarily to the same goals and strategies, because I think PIF feel like they can get the deals done and everything that ties in with Vision 2030. But I think Eales is well aware that if everything succeeds and Newcastle do get back to their best as far as the football is concerned, then at that point, there'll be opportunities all over the world rather than just in England or the Middle East and North Africa. So commercial growth is going to be another part. And then, of course, the new training ground will be a further aspect that he will lead on as well. And really what we know about Eales, particularly from Atlanta United, is that he turned them into a really smart commercial operation. He was appointed by their owner, Arthur Blank, who is very ambitious as well, and that was a new franchise. And Newcastle is very different, but it's also very new in a kind of ironic way, because you've got the old history, but you've got a new structure, you've got new owners, you've got new money, you've got new ambition, and then you need a kind of development of the training ground and a new fan engagement and new commercial opportunities. So you're going to hear the word new a lot. New link between fan base and players, new link between community and football club, new link between Newcastle and Saudi Arabia. So if everything's new, some of the approach, strategically speaking, can almost be treated like a new franchise. And I think that Eales knows how to get large growth quickly and find scale and engagement fast. And that might come as a surprise to some Newcastle fans, because they say, well, we're a big football club, we've got a big fan base, we always get engagement, but you can always do more, particularly in new regions. And I think that his experience in building Atlanta so fast into what they call a franchise out there was one of the main reasons why he got the job. And then the other thing is that he's overseen a couple of training ground rebuilds as well. He was part of Spurs's Hotspur Way project, and then at Atlanta he was a part of the formative stages of their own training ground project, which will now come into full force at a sort of site, I believe, that's near a racecourse in Atlanta. So he knows all about developing facilities. He knows all about building strong foundations, the less glamorous, less headline making stuff. And when fans hear that, they're not going to get excited by fan engagement. They're not going to even get excited necessarily by a better training ground. But if you look at Leicester's training ground, if you look at Tottenham Stadium, these things matter when what fans will want to know first and foremost, a football club goes into the market to a player. And when that player sees the match day experience is modern and fun and inclusive and vibrant, and it is a lot of those things at Newcastle, but everyone can do better. And when a player sees that there's a world-class training ground, and when a player sees that the club are ambitious as a global brand, that can be the marginal gains between picking Newcastle or not. So that modernisation of the football club, from its fan engagement to its digital transformation, to its global commercial growth, to its development of a new training facility. These things are really big in the long-term strategy of the football club, regardless of what happens on the football field. And that's why I think that Eales will be a really, really strong appointment for Newcastle United.
Last 10 minutes, we'll try and get through as many of these as possible. Is Jack Harrison realistic, says Blue Rhythm Boy?
I think that Newcastle wouldn't have put down a fee, if you like. They've made a verbal inquiry, from what I understand, to Leeds United if they weren't interested, but it may not be viable. And I think that they're miles apart, Newcastle and Leeds, in their valuations. So my understanding from Leeds' perspective is that they won't even listen to an offer that is under around 35 million at this stage, and Newcastle are not going to pay above the odds. So Newcastle are currently considering going back and seeing if there's any flexibility. But the challenge they have is that Leeds United have no obligation to sell. So there might be a reliance on Harrison himself feeling like he wants a fresh challenge, and that maybe Leeds is not the right club for him. But there's no intimation of that at this point. He seems happy under Jesse Marsh. And I think that Leeds selling both Rafinha and Calvin Phillips, if they then let Harrison go as well, who off the top of my head, I think got 10 goals. I might be wrong on that, but that's what springs to mind anyway in giving this answer. And either way, he contributes. And if he goes too, Leeds fans are going to see the football club as a selling club and very, very unambitious. And Tyler Adams is a good signing, don't get me wrong, a kind of replacement for Calvin Phillips. And Luis Sinisterra is also a hugely exciting player. But as of now, like for like, he's not Rafinha. So Leeds will be looking to hang on to their other core players, because losing one is expected. Losing two is something you just have to accept in modern football when you're Leeds, despite their history and fan base, because they were fighting for relegation. And one club that a player went to was Barcelona and the other was Manchester City. So that's 2 lots of Champions League football for both of them. But I think if Harrison was to go, and to a club like Newcastle that didn't have any European football, I think that Jesse Marsh and the Leeds fan base would be really, really disappointed. And the club know that. So if Newcastle are to get him, and there is interest, so it's not impossible, but if they're to get him, they're going to have to pay well above market value for the player.
Okay, what's the interest level of Kamal Dean? Is this more paper talk or credible interest? There was another one as well. Was it Sulaimana? It's another one that seems to be linked with Newcastle today.
They might be the same player, because it's Kamaldeen Sulaimana.
There we go then. That shows my level of interest and knowledge of this guy. I don't even know the guy. It's the same player. But yeah, is there any interest? Any interest in this guy?
I mean, again, and I know it sounds a bit like a broken record, but welcome to the transfer window. Newcastle have inquired about him. He's at Rennes. And I think that he is a name being looked at concurrently with players like Harrison. And I don't think that Newcastle are in any way advanced here. But what I can tell you is that he's got the attributes that would make him a real fan favourite. He's a little bit inconsistent for me. And sometimes his first touch is a little bit heavy, but he's got a lot of tricks. He's extremely skillful, and he's shown that domestically and also on international duty with Ghana as well. So there's a lot of confidence on the ball. I know that Ajax and Bayer Leverkusen have both looked at the player in a bit more of an advanced sense than Newcastle United. And the main reason for that is that whereas with the out-and-out attacker, they're perhaps prepared because of Wilson and Wood to go very young and a bit more unproven, like a hot talent. I think with their sort of winger, they would prefer someone a bit more established. And Sulaimana is only 20 and is still developing. And Rennes paid, I believe, about 17 million for him. So they're going to want basically double that, 30 to 35 million, to even listen to offers. So he did really well in Ligue 1 last season. He scored 4 times. He played also in the Europa Conference as well. So, you know, when you compare the two, and I'm just using my opinion here, it's not something that a source has said. If you're saying, based on that assumption that I've just outlined, that Sulaimana will cost you 30 million and that Jack Harrison you might get for 35 million, then why would Newcastle pay 30 million on a 20-year-old that's going to take time to gel in the Premier League versus a more consistent player that's already proven that could slot straight in for around about the same price. So it all comes down again to, you make an inquiry, you get told the player is valued above the market value or above your own estimation, and then you walk away or you prioritize other targets. And I think that's exactly what has happened with an inquiry about Sulaimana. And maybe if Newcastle can drive the price down, they'll advance that interest, but they haven't done anything yet. And, you know, again, if, and it is an if, and I'm only using a logical opinion here rather than something a source has said, but if Leeds, as I do understand, are holding out for 35 and Ren want around 30 to 35 for Sulaimana, then I don't understand why a Premier League club like Newcastle wouldn't just spend that money on Harrison.
Craig Southgate says, evening lads, what's the one transfer that we should be keeping an eye on? There's too many out there. Can you name one of the true ones if you can, Ben?
I mean, they're all true and they're all false is the reality of a transfer window until a club makes an official bid, or even, I would say, gets into advanced negotiations. That's a very, very difficult question to answer. I think that from the ones that we have discussed, I think you should be keeping an eye out on Broja if he becomes available for a loan deal. And that is a conversation that will happen over the course probably of the next week, where Thomas Tuchel will align with the player. And Broja at the moment is saying, look, if I'm not part of your plans or you can't tell me who else you're going to bring in, then I'm more open to a move away. And Chelsea are saying we don't want to sell. And of course, there is a middle ground where the player might be persuaded to go on a loan deal. And that's where I think that Newcastle might enter the race. So that is one to keep an eye on. With Barnes, I wouldn't put too much into it at this stage due to the price. I still don't think it's unthinkable that Newcastle make a bid for Tielemans. And once one club bids, we'll see the hand of all of the other ones. So that, I think, has a legitimacy to it. And then with all of the rest of them, they're just too formative. There's definitely some substance in the Harrison interest, though, because Newcastle did actually inquire and ask around a price of something in the mid-20s, as I understand it, and were largely rebuffed away. And now they're considering whether to go back and make another offer. So that one is not completely dead in the water. And Callum Wendo is not either, who's doing really well in pre-season for PSG and may not be allowed to leave the football club. And I think that PSG's preference would still be to let Icardi go if they can get rid of him, and then keep on to their young star, even with Ekitike's arrival. But with that, you never know, because the player could be lured, and Leeds are feeling like if they don't get to Ketelaere, and I think he'll be off to Milan, they might come in for him as well. So I think there's a bit of substance to that one as well. But fundamentally, this new Newcastle are going to be linked with every player under the sun, because agents can use the club as leverage. And sometimes it's a tactic. You do make a genuine phone call to Dan Ashworth and say, do you fancy this player? And Dan Ashworth says, nope, we're not even remotely interested. And then off goes the agent and says, oh, the player's been offered to Newcastle. And it's not factually incorrect, but what they don't tell you is the club's response to that offer. And then when they then go to other clubs, they say, oh, Newcastle have had a conversation about it, which again is not a lie, but it's a spin on the full context, which is why, even though I often get told during the transfer window I sit on the fence, sometimes I try to give the full context. And the reason for that is because deals, regardless of what you read on social media or from broadcasters like myself, or even from really reputable outlets, deals are not done until probably 95% through the process. Because at any point, someone can make a late inquiry. And as I've already said, that offer by Chelsea for Jesus, however hopeful, is a good example of that. Barcelona trying to hijack Jules Koundé. So you get to a scenario where you might find your agent, your sources close to the player, your buyer and your seller all tell you the same thing, and you report it and everyone says, cool. And if that's an acceptance, a deal is going to happen, everyone gets excited. And if it's a rejection on a deal, everyone says no chance. And then at the last minute, something can change, because that is just the circus of the transfer window. And then everyone backtracks. So when you report on it, you have to be careful now as Newcastle, because the club has been elevated up a tier in terms of the attention it gets. So Newcastle didn't have windows where outside of England they were linked with everyone under the sun. But now they're in a conversation around Neymar. They're in a conversation around, loosely speaking, if you look at the bookies, nothing in this, but Ronaldo, i.e., who are the top 10 clubs if you want to place a bet? Newcastle is one of them at about 33-1. And that's the challenge that Dan Ashworth's got. He's not had a window like this because it wasn't like that at Brighton either. Eddie Howe hasn't had a window like this because it wasn't like it at Bournemouth. So everyone at the football club kind of has to adapt to the elevated attention the football club is getting and work out what's feasible and what's just the football club being leveraged because of the ambition they've got, the wages they can pay, and the money that they might be prepared to spend.
Okay, last question means we're going slightly into overtime. What's your thoughts on Elliot Anderson? Because he's looked well and played well in those pre-season games that we've seen him featuring. Is he going to go out on loan, do you think? Or do you think Eddie Howe's tempted to keep him because of his age and because he's a homegrown player?
I mean, I think Newcastle want to keep him, and they're well aware of what he did for Bristol Rovers, and he was highly, highly heroic in the end, wasn't he, on the final game of the season? So I think Newcastle's perspective is that they clearly want to keep the player, but he's not young, he's not mature enough and developed enough yet, despite what we've seen in pre-season, to be really part of the first team plans in any integral sense. So it wouldn't remotely surprise me if he's loaned out again. And this is very normal, where a club takes the player back for much of pre-season first, because that's the window that they can assess in. And then when the season starts, they then loan him out a little bit later in the window. I know that Bristol Rovers are still keen. I know that Sheffield Wednesday have made an inquiry as well. And I know from Anderson's perspective, he wants to be part of the first team squad at Newcastle United, of course, but it's a big step up from, I think, Bristol Rovers to Premier League football, the way that Newcastle United play. So there's some consultation to be had for sure, because Anderson may say, I'm prepared to sit around on the bench and I want to learn from the players on this training ground and play less. But as you get that movement, and as you get teams that miss out on targets, and as you get sides that have spent their allocation and have to loan instead of buy, that's when you're going to get a lot of movement later in the window. And I think West Brom, by the way, are keeping tabs on him as well. I think from Newcastle's perspective, everyone wants to see him do well. Everyone wants to keep him at the football club. So it probably will be a case of stay or loan. I certainly don't see Newcastle entertaining a permanent sale at this point. And there's more and more clubs looking at him for that purpose. It wouldn't even surprise me if there's some interest, from what I hear anyway, from a couple of the Scottish clubs as well in the SPFL. And, the only challenge really with Anderson is that Newcastle fans, if he is to stay, probably need to judge him a little bit more based upon how he fared for Bristol Rovers than what they're seeing in pre-season. And I think that what I like about him is that he's got a very cool head. He's a good passer of the ball, but I think that he gets pulled out of position sometimes still, and he sits too deep when other teams are breaking through the midfield, particularly on the counter-attack. So I think that learning how to play in a more rigid system at Premier League pace and make quick decisions, and learning how to adapt that position when he's not on the ball, because I think when he is on the ball, he's actually very good. I think that's the big area of his game where he still needs to improve. And I think thrown into regular Premier League football at the moment, he could be exposed. So I think that it's great to hear a young player say he just wants to stay at Newcastle United and fight for his place. And I think that nobody at Newcastle United denies his long-term potential. But in the short term, I think the right thing for his career will be to be loaned again. And if he can go from Bristol Rovers to Championship football next, then that's another good test. It's a slightly more physical test. He's got a bit less time on the ball, and then Newcastle will have a real gauge, and he'll still only be like 20 years of age as well. So I think loan is more likely, but it's refreshing to hear a player come out and just say he wants to stay at the football club and fight for his place when he's that young.
How times have changed. Great stuff as always. Over 500 watching. Thanks to all the moderators and thanks to everybody in the chat for taking part. We managed to get through most of your questions. It's always difficult because Ben likes to give an in-depth answer, but fantastic tonight, Ben, as always. Great insight. Next week, if you're okay for next Sunday, we'll have 2 games to talk about. Newcastle, of course, 3. We've got Benfica on Tuesday, and then we've got 2 next weekend, Friday and Saturday, back-to-back games. So looking forward to chatting to you. And then we're not far away from the serious stuff, Ben.
Yeah, looking forward to it. I just put up my fantasy team on Twitter and it's getting absolutely hammered. I think it's one of those where the players would make a good 11 in reality, but it doesn't really fall into fantasy tactics where your 4 defenders should be 4 fullbacks and you should pick 4 midfielders and 2 strikers. So I'm getting absolutely hammered, but I think it's a decent team. And Trippier and Bruno are both in my starting 11 for game week 1.
Wow, fantastic. Great stuff. We'll maybe look at that a little bit more in depth next week. But Ben, have a great week, mate. Look forward to seeing you next Sunday, pal. Take care.
You too. All the best. Have a good week.